بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وهو المبعوث رحمة للعالمين فنصلي ونسلم عليه وعلى آل بيته وعلى أصحابه. يا ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا لقد ظلمنا أنفسنا ونعترف على ذنبنا ولا غافر للذنوب إلا أنت يا غفار يا غفور. أما بعد, we wanted to focus on the whole issue of legitimacy and authority in the Sunni community in the US. And we wanted to highlight some issues. In fact, this has been an ongoing discussion. This has been an ongoing discussion in the community. One that has been ongoing for a number of years. And two, we find that its relevancy emerges from time to time in an indisputable way. We're talking about the discussion that pertains to the issue of legitimacy and authority. The history of Islam in America, specifically the US, it has a number of different trajectories. And there was a trajectory at one time that specifically it came out of the African American community, which demanded a certain level of commitment from people. And the people, in return, they gave the imam of the masjid, so to speak, a certain degree of authority. And that was part of the attempt on the part of the Muslim African American community to reestablish Islam in their lives and establish Islam in the community. To have the role of the imam serve as the leader of the community as well. Not just one who leads salah, but one who takes on the responsibility of overseeing the affairs of the community. There was a time period at which the structure didn't necessarily come into question in and of itself, but the way that things were handled, and the issue of knowledge became one that seemed to be pressing for many people. And again, I can't be exhaustive here because this is something which is a matter which takes a lot of study and a lot of focus to really understand. But that was one trajectory. The other trajectory was that there were a number of student masjids that emerged, and those masajid emerged at the hands of students who came to study from overseas. And they came here to get experience and degrees within the American university system. And in that model, they created an approach to leadership which became much more fluid. And with time, that model emerged into the whole concept of boards and control by those who either built the masjid or those who got into the seat of decision making by way of a vote, which doesn't necessarily mean that it was the community's voice. It's just like sometimes they have internal mechanisms. They place each other in power, so to speak. Not real power, because there's no real power there. There's relative power, so to speak. And so those positions became positions of so-called authority in the community. But we still suffered the issue of legitimacy, right? And the ability to be educators and leaders in the community. The da'wah in the U.S. had a lot of limitations. The way that the da'wah emerged and the way that the da'wah unfolded, it didn't emerge rooting people necessarily in a strong foundation of Islamic knowledge. And some people had some sort of foundation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they continue to build on it. We're not going to say that there was nothing there, because that's not factual. But I'm painting a broad stroke in saying that scholarship and learning was never really a foundational moment for the Muslims in the U.S. And in part, this was because people had broken away from whatever it was that they knew, or they were creating something new for themselves, right? On the part of the immigrant community in specific, a lot of people were trying to remove themselves from the old models that they had experienced. In the African American community, they were building something anew, trying to build communities, many times, under conditions that were not so great. And so the situation that remains is that there's a level of illiteracy that plagues the Muslim community in the U.S. And at the same time, there is a collapse of legitimacy, whether it is in actual fact, meaning that people that should have authority don't have the authority, or whether that means that, the issue of credentials. And so you find that there's this struggle in the community for legitimacy and authority, right? And this is a continuous struggle. And it comes out of the legacy of the way that Islam unfolded and developed here. When you look back at Al-Andalus, one of the reasons why Al-Andalus became Darul Hadith, or the abode of the Sunnah, was because with time, people, and with coordination, people went to seek out the knowledge of Hadith. And as they began to seek out that knowledge, they took it back to Al-Andalus, to the point where the level of the culture and where the people were at raised instead in station. And so that was one of the reasons why Al-Andalus became Dar al-Hadith, because there was a concerted effort on the part of the Andalusians to seek out that knowledge and bring it back to the community. Al-Andalus was more than Dar al-Hadith because it had produced on so many different levels, right? On the level of fiqh, on the level of tafsir, on the level of the Arabic language. Islamic knowledge encompasses both that which pertains to the Quran and the Sunnah, and that which pertains to our thinking about the world rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah. And so other sciences developed as well. They were not people that had marginalized the knowledge of mathematics and chemistry and biology and all of those things, which allow us to function in the world. But the issue of legitimacy and authority, it has been reduced to personality, it has been reduced to organization, and it hasn't necessarily rooted itself in merit and other things. And so whoever grabs the name and whoever grabs the authority, they claim the legitimacy for themselves. And then we have the phenomena of how the Salafi da'wah unfolded. And I'm talking very loosely here, but I'm just trying to highlight how this problem is continuous. The issue, what we saw in the Salafi da'wah, was the canceling out of other people's ability to even speak. And we see the same among some of the brothers that are within the traditional circles. And so the moment, the Andalusian moment, so to speak, never really happens in the U.S. because of this, which is the moment of the community of Muslims in the U.S. maturing and developing themselves to a point in which they can handle their own affairs. There's always this question of legitimacy and authority and, having to go back to personas and so on and so forth. And, I actually, one of the things, I had personal experiences in which I personally blocked brothers because they try to bring their whole concept of follow the code. And what they meant was, that you have to prove who gave you legitimacy. How are you legitimate? You have to prove it. And for me, to be honest with you, I don't care. It's like when you're not, you do a service and then you keep it moving. And that's my philosophy. You do a service and you keep it moving. Although I'll bemoan the problem of community or the absence of community, it's not an issue of cult following or trying to get a name. But I say that to say this, that when I first came into Islam, I used to follow an imam who didn't have a lot of knowledge, so to speak. But he was one that had, Assalamu alaikum, he was one that had, Barakallahu fikum. He was one that had legitimacy. From what angle? He proved himself in the community. He was one of the senior imams in Cleveland, and he went all the way back to the Dar. And it's just like and there were issues that were there, but the reality of the situation is that his legitimacy was gained by way of his service to the community. And I look back, Rahmatullahi alayhi, he passed away. I look back on that years later, and I have a lot of respect for that, from the angle of not because I'm associated, but because of the issue of what he did for the community. And so it makes me think that a lot of times we don't understand legitimacy in the right way. There are certain things which make things legitimate and other things which illegitimize. Like, for instance, when people claim to be authorities in the knowledge of Islam and they barely studied, that's an issue. Or, for instance, when people studied and they get canceled out because other people don't like them, that's an issue. Or, for instance, when you have an imam that has been on the block 40 years, 30 years, he put in work, he gained some understanding of how to work with the community, and then you have someone that comes with a degree or an ijazah that comes and they delegitimize. That's an issue. We have to understand that the way that our community, is one in which we're in the development mode. And because we're in the development mode, we're still growing. And so we have to, I want to close on this note that we have to have a sense of understanding that we're still developing. We have not arrived. There's no such thing as that we arrived and we're just maintaining. We're still in the growing process. That's one. Two, we have to understand that, we have to move away from persona and personality. This type of model has really messed us up. Some people, that they built a legacy around their persona. If you keep following that type of approach, that you're gaining legitimacy from the persona of another persona, and they knock you off, all of the work that you're doing just goes out the door if you're depending only upon that type of criteria for legitimizing yourself. You need to continue to grow, right? There needs to be a continuation of growth. Don't stay with one person. And this is the problem that we had back in the day, that, is like sometimes there was a tendency to try to restrict the community to just stay in one masjid. And that had its pros and cons, but, one of the things that did was that it stunted the growth of the community from one side, and it built the community from another side. Loyalty is important, but when we start talking about the issue of growing in continuity, we have to ask ourselves, are we being loyal to a personality, or are we being loyal to principles and values and knowledge? Right. And that's the issue. So it may begin at first, our quest of knowledge may begin that we took knowledge from particular people. And, that's part of the process, especially if we love those people. Part of the process is that there's a personal affection that's there. But you can't leave that to be what it is, and you can't leave that to be what it is and then just say this is the only way. That's what I mean by that. Like, if this is not in place, then nothing else exists. In other words, if that person is not around, then I have no legitimacy. That doesn't work like that. That's why it's important to continue to bounce, and continue to learn, so to speak, from situation to situation. It's unfortunate because then that creates another problem. That creates the issue of how do you consolidate the community? How do you have leadership? You understand what I'm saying? When when you're moving around in that way. And, and that, like I said, it's a complicated issue. The only thing that I can say, and I'm trying to hold back from saying certain things and just being emotional about some of this stuff. So it kind of clouds your judgment a little bit. You have to be calm. But the bottom line is that we have to learn how to be community. We have to learn how to cooperate. We have to root ourselves in Islamic knowledge with continuity and just keep building. We cannot allow ourselves to stagnate because people want to chokehold the community, right? That's the bottom line. We can't allow ourselves to stagnate because people want to chokehold the community. The issue of leadership and the issue of legitimacy is not about persona and personality, right? It's not about persona and personality. It's really about commitment to the community. And then in the ideal sense, that commitment to the community should be rooted in knowledge. So there has to be a continuum of work and knowledge, continuum of work and knowledge, continuum of work and knowledge. And that's how the community can move to another level. But if those who are in activists, they're activists, but then they don't want to deal with the knowledge side. And the activism is not just political activism. It's involvement in the community. That's what I'm thinking here. If they, disregard the knowledge side, that becomes an issue. And if those that are on the knowledge side, so to speak, they don't want to be involved in the community, the only thing that they want to do is teach, that becomes an issue. The Sahaba, they were able to garnish both sides, and they were able to or galvanize both sides. They were able to bring those two sides together. And so that's what we need. We need to be able to move to the next level, and we're going to burn out, and we're going to burn each other out, unfortunately. And there's been many cases at which this has gotten nasty. It has become nasty. It hasn't been nice. And there's been breakoffs. And a lot of this comes from the fact that we don't acknowledge that we have to grow. We don't acknowledge that we have to do things differently. We don't acknowledge that we don't have it together. That's the reality. We don't have it together. You know what I'm saying? Like, when we look at the reality, progress of a community is not going to be weighed in the fact that we multiplied the number of masajids. And that now we got to a point where there's $5 million masajid. That's not progress. You know what I'm saying? What that is a show of growth and not a real legitimate proof of growth. And so the reason why we say that is because, a lot of people now lost their commitment to Islam. And Islam has been redefined. A lot of people have lost their commitment to Islam for a number of different reasons. And in those same communities in which people claim growth, a lot of those youth are having issues. They're having issues even wanting to be a part of those communities. So we can't, we have to be careful how we measure growth. But one thing is for sure, even if we look at the example of Shaykh Uthman bin Fodio, that the continuity of the Jama'ah is not about one person maintaining the lead. Shaykh Uthman bin Fodio, rahmatullahi alayhi, he built other people so that those people can continue to take the lead, and then the legacy continues, and he stepped back. Ultimately, when everything was put in place, he stepped back because he built a legacy which allowed continuity, and it allowed succession. Right? And so that's how we have to think that, we have to try to build that framework, but then also we have to know how to pull back. You know what I'm saying? And there's a dual move there. There's that necessity for people to respect leadership, and the necessity of leadership to respect allowing other people to grow. Right? That's the principle that we learned. And in that, Shaykh Uthman bin Fodio, rahmatullahi alayhi, he manifested highly the qualities of the Sahaba. And he manifested highly the qualities of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that regard. Qualities of the Sahaba, you saw them that they were manifest in his community, right? And he imitated what they imitated in leadership and building. And the qualities of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he embodied that in himself as well. You see that. You see how he taught the community, how he built the community. So that early generation knowledge, he embodied it. And I was trying to hold back on some things, but, we're not going in the right direction. I keep saying this stuff. People say, well, prove it. Dude, prove what at the end of the day? You have brothers that'll come. Who have you been with? This comes from the indigenous community itself. I don't need to put a CV out there. This is now I'm getting personal on this issue. I don't need to put a CV out there. I don't need to advertise everything that I do on the ground. You know what I'm saying? It's like, try being on the ground. Try being on the ground. Try delving in knowledge. Try dealing with the people. Try building yourself up. And when you try all those things, you begin to have respect for other human beings in general, just out of principle, because you know that life is difficult. But when we delegitimize each other, and that's the tendency that we have in our community, that someone is trying to make an effort, we come and we delegitimize it. Or we come and we try to take it over. Those are the two issues that we confront ourselves with. Right? That's why I said there's a lot of stuff that I want to say, but I'm holding back on a lot of really being 100% clear on a lot of these issues. But I want to close in saying that, look, continue to move, brothers. Continue to move. Some people are in love with leadership. They're in love with it. You know what I'm saying? And some people will not allow other people to exist in leadership positions. And then there's another issue is that, leadership without solid brothers, you know what I'm saying, is not real leadership. Leadership is, when you have someone that's at the forefront, at the head, and you have solid brothers, and then you have a jama'ah, then you have solid leadership. There's no such thing as leadership with the individual head and that's it. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't work like that. You have to have both. You have to have the brothers, and you have to have the head, to organize, and there has to be constant communication between them. But this the way that we delegitimize, each other. That's one problem. The other problem is that, you have some communities, they completely control the imam. That I was speaking kind of initially in the indigenous community, but when you look in the immigrant community, they completely delegitimize the imam and the mashaykh. And so nothing gets built, and then they're not able to counsel the people. They're not able to teach the people. They're not able to organize the community. They're not able to do a lot of things. But the imam continues to be pigeonholed. The imam and the sheikh continues to be controlled, right, to a point where nothing gets done, right? And so we have the leadership and the authority stuff completely wrong in this regard. We have to go back and revisit all of this stuff, which is not bad. We have to go back and revisit this stuff and see how it is that we can renew, see how it is that we can reform. Because you know what this does is it collapses communities. I know 2 masjids right now. One masjid within the last few years built out. They moved the location that they were in, built a new building, and the masjid remained empty for a long period of time. They had no imam. Now they have an imam that's leaving. And the majority of the existence of that community has been imamless. And I know another community, it exists like that with no imam, period. So who do the people go to for counseling? Who do the people go to deal with their situations? If that community doesn't organize itself properly, they won't have any sense of community. And that has been the problem of the professionals. That they feel as though because they put money forward, they own the community. And it's like that only goes so far, because your money from the beginning, it contributes and it builds, but it only goes so far. Are you doing it for Allah, or are you doing it for something else? And so that becomes the issue, that the way that we have built in the Sunni community is a lot of times the foundation is not based in the deen, right? And so those are examples. I have another example where right now the imam fell ill to the hospital. And so there's a big question mark. And because that imam had a very limited role. He was really only the imam of Jummah. He wouldn't show up at any other time. And so now that masjid, the history of it is in question. Because the question is, who will come to succeed? And some people say, "What are you talking, brother? What have you done?" Well, I was in that masjid. I was in that masjid. I was a part of that masjid. I was even a part of the board of that masjid. I was even an imam of that masjid. But when you have communities that fight growth, sometimes you have to abandon these approaches and these projects. There's another masjid where the imam is elderly. And it has managed to survive. It has managed to pull itself out, keep the doors open. But the imam is elderly. Imam is elderly. He gets sick. It's only a matter of time before the imam disappears. And so the question of the future of that masjid, is before us. And that's what we confront on all of these issues. There's another community, which the imam died. And so now the question becomes like, now, who comes next? How was that community built? Can it sustain itself? Or will it be a community that collapses? And so that's the issue that, we don't really understand what's at stake. We're talking about the future of Islam. And as we're talking about trying to build the community, we're not clear on what leadership is. We have brothers that just want to be in the position of leadership and show it out, but they don't want to bear the brunt of the community. If you ask them, go do counseling, they won't do any counseling. If you ask them, go do durus, they can't do many durus. If you ask them, coordinate for the community, they can't really coordinate for the community. And so you have situations in which, people want power and position, but they don't want to put in the work and the time and the effort, to really do what's necessary to lead the community. And that's on all fronts. And so, I definitely went beyond where I wanted to go. So, there's a process. We have to build ourselves up. We have to learn how to cooperate. We have to learn how to duplicate. And that means that we have to learn how to duplicate ourselves and then let those people be. But also those people, it's not just the issue of coming in. I had students that, they wanted to study, and all they wanted was to prove to other people that they studied. And if that's the approach that we have to each other, we're just trying to gain legitimacy from each other and cancel each other out, then, I just don't see a future for Islam like that. Just like I don't see a future for Islam in communities that have no respect for the imam, and they pigeonhole the imam, and the imam can make no position, take no position. The imam can't make any moves. Just like, I have little respect for imams that don't continue to develop themselves. Not necessarily as a person, but I'm talking about as a job title, because people deserve respect as human beings. But I'm talking about as functions. I want to respect these approaches. And that's the issue at the end of the day. That's the issue at the end of the day. Everybody wants to lead, but nobody wants to take accountability at the crisis of the Muslim community. You know, everyone wants the power position and the title and everything that comes like that. But they don't want to take the responsibility for the breakdown in the Muslim community, right? And so that, at a certain point in time, someone will come to account for that. You know what I'm saying? When you want to grab the title, when you want to grab the lead, but you don't want to do anything to make sure that you're addressing the problems of the Muslim community, you want the title and the lead. You want the title and the lead as long as that gives you power. But when it comes to addressing the garbage and the problems of the Muslim community, you're nowhere to be found. You know what I'm saying? And you're never, ever going to be able to solve that by thinking that you're going to control someone with money, by thinking you're going to control someone with their livelihood. You know, that's the issue. And so you have it on so many different fronts. You have it on the fronts that you have the problem on the front that you have communities that don't know what it is to build communities. And then you have people that want to lead and don't want to let anybody else come in. You know, they don't want anybody else to come and have a space. And then you just have, it's too many factors of control, too many factors of choking out the whole process. And so after, you know, let's say we believe that Islam has been here for years on end, but let's just look at the last 50 years. The last 50 years, if the only thing the Muslim community in the U.S. has to prove of what it has been doing in the last 50 years is the multiplication of buildings, and we can count on our hands how many ulama we have produced as a community within the last 50 years. You know, that those are all judgments, you know, upon us with regard to what we have been doing. You know, that's the reality. If we, within the last 50 years, you just look at this situation. Within the last 50 years, we have imams like Siraj Wahaj and other imams. What kind of voice do they have in the overall community? Like Imam Mutawwis Shaheed in Cleveland. You have a number of different imams that have been around for 40, 50 years. And then you have young boys that come in and they think that they have the experience of understanding how to build community, of understanding how to lead, of understanding how to take position. That's arrogance. That's sheer arrogance. You know, the least that we do is we sit with people, you know, that have had experience, and we take knowledge from them and we humble ourselves, right? So that's one issue, that the concept of elder is completely eliminated. And then you have a generation like my generation, a number of us. A number of us have been burnt out of the communities, right? To the point where it's like a lot of brothers that have gone to study, they're nowhere to be seen. Actually, one imam was telling me recently that there was a brother he knew that was 10 years straight in the dawah, disappeared completely, burnt out, disappeared completely. And that's the trend. You have